Everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're joining us from. I know we've got people from all over the world joining us today. We're so grateful for you to make some time in your day to come and hear from us, to hear about Map the System. And I'm very excited that today we're joined by the North Dakota State University team who competed in Map the System last year. And they did extremely well. They came second in the global final and also got the Audience Choice Award. So they did extremely well. So they kindly offered to come along and talk to us today so we could hear a little bit more about their experiences. So by the end of today, our goal is that you kind of feel that you know a bit more about Map the System. There'll be a chance for you to ask some questions. This is a webinar, so this session is recorded. If you're an attendee, we can't see you, we can't hear you, so instead we'll be using the Q&A function, and also feel free to use the chat. In the chat, please tell us where you're joining us from today so we can get a feel from who's in the room. And please, don't be shy with using the chat and the Q&A function. We also should have closed captions if anyone needs those. So before we move on to hearing from the North Dakota State University team, and today we're going to be doing a fireside chat. And what we mean by that is just a relaxed environment of conversation. So this isn't a structured presentation. This is a chance for us to kind of be in this environment where we can hear from the team and just feeling like we're all relaxed. So before we do that, I just wanted to give a little bit of context about some potential topic ideas that you could think about. So I know that some of you might already have a really good idea of what your map system topic is going to look like. Some of you might have loads of ideas. So I'm just going to speak for a couple of minutes about this just to kind of give you something to think about essentially. So on Map the System, we have 4 themes or tracks. And the goal of these is really just to provide a bit of framework and some inspiration for you to refer to when you're refining your topic. So you shouldn't feel confined within these 4 areas. They are health, climate, economic, and social. And a good way to think about it is that most complex challenges and wicked problems probably span all of those challenges, but it's very difficult to try and focus on all those aspects at once. So in your project, it's probably going to be more helpful for you to maybe focus on a particular framing or part of that issue. So if you're looking at like the effects of climate change in a particular community, looking at like the health effects of that, or the economic effects, or the effects on social inequality, for example. So the most important thing really though is that you're selecting a topic that you feel passionately about. That's going to help you so much with your research and every stage. So just a tiny bit about each of these themes. So the health theme, we want to think about the systemic shocks we've been facing as a global community in recent years. COVID-19, there's a global cost of living crisis, the effect of climate change on health and that intersection, the war in Ukraine, amongst other, mass displacements. These continue to challenge the health of so many populations and affect well-being through like all aspects of society. We can think about the effects on food security, education, and employment. So we can start to see that intersection of health with some of these issues. Some potential questions just for you to think about as you're thinking about topic ideas is how can we keep our citizens healthy so there's less need for healthcare? And how can we meet everyone's health needs and give everyone the opportunity to be healthy? So the team that are here today, their topic actually kind of did intersect multiple of the challenges, including health. So I've just highlighted their project as an example here. And at the end of the session, we'll share a link to the Map System website where you can look at all of the finalists from last year, but also recent years to give you some good inspiration. The climate theme, as we know, the climate crisis is a real tipping point and urgent action is so needed, but not necessarily happening to avoid further catastrophic consequences. And we really need structural changes in the entire economic, energy, transport, food systems, every kind of system we can think of. So again, some questions for you to think about. How might particular industries adopt circular and regenerative business models? And how can different interconnected systems such as food, health, energy, transport become more resilient? And what can we learn from the pandemic to take forward? And apologies, I meant to say that the University of Chicago team last year, they were one of our top finalists. Their project was Roadblocks to Sustainable Palm Oil Production in Indonesia. So that's a really interesting project to look at as well. The economic theme, how can economies become more sustainable, inclusive and equal as the world continues to emerge from the pandemic? The cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, which we've seen, really like what the effect of a globalized world is, that when there's one, there could be like this domino effect of issues that affect so many parts of our lives that maybe people weren't aware of before. When we think about the economic theme, this involves governments, international donor institutions, corporations, non-profits, everyone that collectively constitutes this political economic system. And a couple of questions to think about. How has the experience of COVID-19 and the cost of living crisis changed the prospects for universal basic income, wealth taxation, reparations to historically disadvantaged groups, and other programs that could reduce inequality? And how can the workplace better accommodate people with family responsibilities, which disproportionately affect women who tend to care for children or parents? The winning team last year from the University of Cape Town, their project was in the economic theme, and they looked at financial exclusion in the South African mortgage provision. And that's a super interesting topic to look at too. The last theme is the social theme. And we're really living in this moment of entangled systemic crises. Health, economic, climate, education, inequality, and without kind of a social reset, we can't untangle any of those. They're so interconnected. So we're trying to imagine what could it take to create a society that is fair, dignified, equitable, and unbreakably resilient, one where everyone can thrive. A couple of just questions again for you to think about. How might we design a society where people have the power to easily change things that are unfair? And how might we create a system that nourishes and serves society rather than individuals? And the Grinnell College team last year came third place in the map system competition. Their topic's a super interesting one too, human trafficking in Assam. So as I mentioned at the end, we'll send you links to easily find all these projects, but hopefully that's just given you a little bit of an idea, some things to think about in terms of your project. And the project we're going to hear about today was an extremely fascinating one. And as I mentioned, kind of intersected multiple of those. A couple of like prompts. This is from our map system educator at Oxford, thinking about what topic you want to focus on. Think about what bothers you, what makes you sad, what makes you angry. Because if you have a topic you care deeply about, that's really going to motivate you, because map the system is a very time-intensive project because you're really delving so deep into these issues. So if it's something you connect personally with, that's really going to help you carry forward the project. And if you and your teammates have a shared passion for the topic, that's also really going to help you. So thank you for listening to me. That's the end of just me showing you a couple of slides. So now we're going to move to the exciting part, which is hearing from the North Dakota State team. They'll obviously be able to introduce their topic better than me, but just for those of you who don't know, their project was titled Water is Life, Water Access in the Navajo Nation. So I'm delighted to be joined by Abby, Tegan, Taylor, Leonella today, and Onnalee and Stephanie, who are the educators, also here if there are any specific questions about the educator role relating to supporting this amazing team. And the problem statement for this project was access to water is something most citizens in the USA take for granted. Of people in the Navajo Nation, water takes on a very important cultural role, and yet many people are without safe and reliable access to water. And that was just a screenshot, so you can just kind of see that's a tiny little segment of their systems map. It had so many intersections of issues. It's a wonderful example. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Tegan, Abby, Taylor, Leonella, would you be able to briefly introduce yourselves, and as you each introduce yourselves, maybe just tell us a little bit about why you took part in Map System, or what was the highlight of taking part? Feel free to, should we start with Tegan?
Yeah, I can start. Hi, everybody. My name is Tegan. I am in my third year at McGill University in Montreal, and I'm studying cognitive science. And I took part in Map the System actually for 2 years. I did projects, and this past year was like my second year. And I just had a really good time the first year learning how to do systems maps, and I just found it to be so fascinating. But the first year I did it, it was still COVID, so we were all online, and I wanted to have an opportunity to do things more in person, which we had the pleasure of doing when we went to Oxford, and we also had an in-person final at North Dakota State University, and so that was just so much fun. But overall, I did Map the System because I wanted to dive deep into a social issue and learn more about something that fascinated me.
Please
I
go
can go
ahead.
next. Hello everyone. My name is Taylor Billy, and I am from Northwest New Mexico. I am Dana, from the Navajo Nation, and I'm a graduate student, actually at the University of North Dakota. But I joined the North Dakota State team for this actually, and I work closely with Leonla in our community in Shiprock, New Mexico. And I'm in my master's program in public health, and my focus, my concentration or area is in Indigenous health. So this was really a project that was really, it's close to home, and I have relatives and a lot of people that I know who are still living, without running water. And so it's also some of the things that we work on through public health, some of our service project through work. And I think one thing that I really got out of this actually, which really helped just this previous semester in my grad program, is that I kind of looked at an extensive area of water access on the Navajo Nation, and maps kind of was like the groundwork. And so I was able to look at the legal water rights issues that are impacting the Navajo Nation and water settlements. And so, but I think there were so many things that was really helpful and I really enjoyed about Map the System. And it's interesting because I think just almost a year ago is when Leonla introduced this project to me, and I wasn't really sure what it was. And now it's completely morphed into all of this. So that was really exciting. But I will hand it over to Abby or Leonla to also introduce themselves.
I can go next. So my name is Abby Brecky. I am in my second year at NDSU studying biochemistry. I heard about Map the Systems, about a year ago, and I like to try new things. So I just kind of went out on a whim on it, I guess. And I was presented the topic of water access within the Navajo Nation, and I had never really heard about it that much. It's not really a topic that you typically learn in high school or in college. So I said, let's do it. And I think that's one of the benefits of participating in Map the Systems, is I was able to kind of delve deep in a topic that I wouldn't have necessarily done in my education. And One of the highlights for sure is that, but also I've never been out of the US. So being able to go to England and then taking like a celebratory trip to Spain was very exciting, to seeing all of the cultures and what life is like out of the US. So.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Leonla Nelson, and I just got done with my grad program at North Dakota State this last month. I got my master's in public health, and I joined Map the Systems with this great team about a year ago as well. And I think what I got out of it is I didn't know what to expect. If I'm really honest, I wasn't quite sure. I got some guidance from our mentors who are on, and then the team members also just really helped with the topics. And so when we settled on water access in Navajo Nation, which is where I'm from, I live in a small community called Tisas, Arizona, in the US. And as Taylor said, it's just normal that a lot of our community members don't have water. So being able to dive into that deeper and think about solutions and it's easy to think, I think what I got out of it is it's easy to be like, well, you just need money, or, like what kind of surface solutions, but our team really went deep into like what really are the issues. And that's what MAPS provides, is to take a deep look into that stuff, and also at yourself. I learned a lot of things even about me and my community and my family through MAPS. And so I feel like that was a huge benefit. So highly recommend to everybody to give it a try.
Thank you so much, all of you, for being here, and lovely to hear your speak. So could you tell us a little bit more about how you kind of settled on selecting your topic and forming your team, how that happened? Because I believe you guys are a remote team, just to give people an idea of how you might find teammates at your institution that you might not have come into contact with otherwise.
It's actually a good question. I believe it was a lot of work on the educators, kind of connecting us to each other. Maybe Stephanie could jump in, because I don't really remember exactly the details, but I'm pretty sure Stephanie suggested this topic, and then it was kind of reached out to other people, including like myself and Abby, people who were interested in this topic. And then we got connected to well, first through Leonla, because Leonla was studying public health with Stephanie, and then Leonla mentioned her friend Taylor. So that's kind of how we all got connected. But I don't know if Stephanie, you probably remember better than me.
No, great start, Tegan. You did a pretty good job. Last year this was my first year participating as an educator last year, and so we included public health students. And so Tegan's right. That's kind of, I was pulling Leonla along, going, I think you would enjoy this. I think your skills would be really well utilized. And she pulled Taylor in from the other public health program, and then yeah, Tegan and Abby were like looking for a project that would be really dynamic and really like the topic would just made so much sense, right? And they didn't know each other, which is a little scary, maybe a lot scary, that maybe we'll talk about later, and maybe some of the participants are feeling. Who are these people? Am I going to get along with them? Group projects are hard, kind of scary thoughts, but that's really kind of how things rolled together, is us as educators, and also Dr. Nordstrom really pulling people in based on their skills or based on their interests, and encouraging, a lot of encouragement.
That's great, thank you. So do you have any tips for obviously working as a remote team, working as a multidisciplinary team, on how like people taking part this year might be able to kind of maximize their time? That's like one thing that we like to encourage teams to think about, is maybe everyone can kind of have like a little like, well, expertise, like I'm going to focus on like learning how to do Kumu, or I'm going to focus on doing this bit of research, rather than all members of the team trying to do everything, because as we know, that's challenging.
Yeah, I can start, and then my teammates can jump in. I think that's what we did, because we didn't know each other. I think we first started off just doing meeting, getting to know each other. I think we asked each other like just real basic, like, who are you? Getting, taking a real interest in getting to know each other. We did that. And then, yeah. And because Tegan was our veteran team member, she was able to explain and really take the reins on like, you do that, we should do this, this is how we do it. And then everyone just kind of fell into pieces that seemed to be of interest on what our project was going to be on, and what people had time for. I know Abby had a really took on a huge chunk of doing like the map and the the iceberg model, and Taylor and I did a lot of the research, and Tegan put it, so we all kind of, I think, our strengths, as you said, but we also were really committed to meeting regularly because we were remote, and I feel like I probably did a lot of like the calendar invite. So I was always like, well, I'll do it, I'll send it, and make sure. We did a lot of Zooming and making sure that our schedules aligned, and just being open to it, because we're in different time zones as well. Tegan is in Canada, so she was a few hours ahead, and then Abby's kind of in the middle, and then Taylor and I are on West Coast time. So it was challenging. Sometimes we met at 7 my time, sometimes we met at 8 Tegan's time. So it was really, you just have to be open. But like I said, I think we were quite committed to doing that. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on how we made that work.
I can jump in a little bit. Yeah, we were remote. I mean, 2 different countries, 3 different time zones, but I think that it was one of our biggest strengths, actually, because we all understood that we are remote. We literally never met each other until we actually presented at NDSU, North Dakota State. And just kind of finding time, making sure that we understood everybody's schedules was like a lot to take on. But like Leanna said, we all kind of like divvied up the tasks. Tegan, took a look at the solutions, and we didn't really know much about the topic beforehand. So we took on making sure that we really like understood the overview of the topic before we started looking in depth with it. And then, Taylor and Leanna are taking a look more at the federal policies, the home site lease, which is crazy. But, and then all of the demographics, I took on the map, the iceberg model, the stakeholders map is kind of my like expertise, I guess. But we all, understood each other. We all know that we have school and work, other extracurriculars that we were a part in, and making sure that we consistently met, planning in advance. We had spring break, and I was like, we need to make sure we meet before and after spring break, because it's gonna go completely over our heads. But that's kind of how we worked around it.
Amazing. You guys did an awesome job. One thing that a few students have asked us about in the past is what it's like taking part in map system as undergraduate students. So I believe Tegan and Abby, you're undergraduate students, and Leonella and Taylor, you're postgraduate students. So it'd be great to hear a bit about both experiences, both how you found it taking part as an undergraduate student, and then what it was like working in like the mixed team as well, and how you kind of made the most of those mixed skills.
I think what really helped me is that I was doing the project for the second time. So I will say, if you aren't happy with how your project went, or you just had a really good experience, like either way, and you want to try Map the System again, I would highly encourage you to do so, because I always kind of think of my first year as like my test year. Like I had none of us knew what we were doing. And our project turned out pretty okay. But it was just really nice to kind of do like almost a test run. And then for the second year, I kind of came in with like a knowledge of how the program worked, because it can be a little bit overwhelming your first time. There's a lot to learn, and it's a lot of information thrown at you all at once. So don't get discouraged if you feel like you struggle a little bit, or maybe there are some people who did it last year. Like, it's a good idea to try again, because why not? So that helped me a lot. But I know Abby, who was the other undergrad, was doing it for the first time. So maybe she wants to talk about her experience as an undergrad. I feel like mine is a little unique since I was doing it for the second time.
Yeah, so I participated for the first time last year as a freshman or first year. And like I said, kind of in my introduction, I just kind of went on a whim. I didn't really know what map systems was. I just kind of heard about the opportunity and decided to try it out. And obviously it turned out really well, and we're all still kind of in touch here and there. But it was definitely different because I felt like I didn't really know what was going on. I was like looking up to Tegan because I knew that she participated in it last year and she kind of had more of like a background knowledge, but it was a learning curve and it took a lot of time to kind of understand and take a step back. But I tried not to let it discourage me because I ended up growing really passionate for the project. The more that I learned about it, the more that I got passionate for it. So ended up working really well. Don't let it discourage you. It's a lot of work, but definitely worth it in the end.
Amazing. And I don't know if Taylor or Leonella have got any comments on, like, it's probably actually quite nice to work with people on different stages of their like academic journeys, because it's not something that you would normally get to do. Normally, I know like postgraduate students don't mix very much with undergraduate.
I think I really appreciated Abby and Tegan because I think they just really jumped in. And I think you mentioned, Alice, a little bit earlier about like what was it like working with people that you don't know? Like, did you feel scared? And I think I was just kind of curious, and I was wondering how, non-Indigenous students would work with us, and sometimes that can get difficult and challenging. But I think Tegan and Abby really did a great job of like listening to Leonla and I on just kind of going with that and kind of always checking in with us. But I really enjoyed working with Abby and Tegan, and I felt like in some ways at the beginning it felt like we were kind of guiding, and then when we needed kind of a deeper dive, like I think Leonla and I stepped in a little bit more. So that was I think really interesting, and I've never been like a TA or anything like that when I was an undergrad or even as a grad student. So but I think that's just kind of my perspective, and I don't know, Leonla, if you have any thoughts or different perspective than I did.
I think the only thing I'll add is that Taylor and I also have work experience. We both work in public health. So we were able to bring some of that into this work. And then Tegan and Abby came in from like more like academic. And so that was really neat and dynamic as well.
That's awesome. We bring in different perspectives. Amazing. So someone has asked in the Q&A how much time you guys spent kind of on average on your project per week or throughout the kind of main cycle. So obviously there's kind of the main project that you would have done like this time last year up till April, and then obviously you guys went ahead to the global final, so that was kind of another step of preparation. But roughly, how much time would you guys say that you spent on each stage of the project?
I want to say, I think everyone, of course, worked outside, but online together, we would be like, oh, let's just meet real quick, 30 minutes, and 2 hours later. So I want to say 2 hours a week of meeting. Does that sound right to you guys? Give or take, averagely, probably. And then, of course, your outside work.
Yeah, especially like in the more crunch time. Maybe it wasn't 2 hours the whole semester. I want to say it started out maybe a little less than that. And just kind of like built and built and built. But like Abby said, and like other people have said, we were just getting really passionate for the project. So it didn't really feel like so much of a chore. So that really helped. Like the time kind of flew by, like Leona said, it would just all of a sudden 2 hours has gone by, and it's like felt like I just blinked. But you can kind of, the thing is that we really poured a lot of our like hearts into it. But you can definitely make a really good project with less time than that. It's just really going to depend on what you want your final product to look like, and how much research you need, how much outside knowledge you already have. because obviously that's going to help. But if you need to like find all your research from scratch, and that's why I think a big tip that's given to students math system is consider your access to knowledge on the subject. If you're trying to pick a topic, it's probably a good idea to try to pick something that's like close to where you live or close to you as a person. You don't have to, but it just might make the time a little bit easier because you can draw on your own experiences or draw on your own community around you.
That's a really good idea. I'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of if there was anything that like surprised you about the project, and in terms of like how you initially thought of your topic versus how like it ended up. Like maybe you had like some preconceived ideas of what you thought the like root causes were going to be, whether you had to like shift the focus from as you kind of got into your research, or any like roadblocks that came up.
I can start with that. I think Leona mentioned earlier, like for us and a lot of like topics around health and Indigenous health and access, I think sometimes we kind of already know the answer. Like there's underfunding, that's underfunded. And so I think like I knew that at the back of my head, but Leona and I had talked to some different people here that kind of working kind of in the engineering construction. And I think there was a lot of kind of community, like the community aspect. So in our project, we talked about how there's this huge process for someone to get water, and they have to have a home site lease, and they have to go through all of these different kind of tribal government processes. And I think on my perspective, I learned a lot about like there's a lot of community things, and we'll talk probably about colonialism a little bit later, but I think there's a lot of structures that our nation, I'm not trying to like make our tribal nation look bad, but I think we have kind of taken that perspective that's not traditionally in our culture, and we've kind of turned it around. I think you might know, people might have heard of like collateral oppression. So I think it's kind of a little bit essences of that, and like we're not being in community as much as we think we are, or good relatives. So I think that was really hard for me to learn about these processes that are kind of we as a tribal nation made initially, but they're actually not actually helping our community members. So I think that was really what I learned, and something like I wouldn't say necessarily, I think that the solution we talked about was updating tribal policies, which is a lot harder than you can say that, but it's a lot harder to do. So, but I think that was something that I wasn't entirely expecting at first when we started map the system.
I guess I can speak a little bit more on this because, like I said earlier, I typically probably wouldn't have delved deep into this topic or even kind of remotely heard about it if it wasn't for map the systems. So for that, I'm really grateful for, but kind of like a roadblock, I guess, which was actually the center of our map, was the data gap. And that was kind of, before starting the competition and even like looking into the project, I could make like assumptions, I guess. But once I started doing research, it was kind of hard to do research because there's not really a lot of statistics on the problem at hand, which we soon found to be kind of a roadblock and something that was a big part of our problem. But it also, like, I think it made us try to do more research, just because we weren't given those statistics, it didn't stop us. And we tried to keep like powering through them and trying to find, what is causing this problem? Why are we not getting the statistics that we're looking for? And so kind of going back to like, don't letting it discourage you just because you don't find the information on a very nice demographic on images on Google doesn't mean that it's not out there, the information's not out there.
That's great. We had a a question that's come in relating to data and about primary and secondary data. So just briefly to say that you don't have to include primary data in your project. That might not be feasible or ethical or possible for your topic, particularly if it's a sensitive topic. For example, you're looking at a topic that affected children. We definitely wouldn't recommend doing any primary research with children, obviously, but potentially you could do that in a different way. Maybe you have a contact that has worked with children, so kind of you're able to speak to them in that slightly separated way, or you can look at like some other forms of data that maybe are less like obvious straight away, but it's kind of like looking at social media posts or blog posts, and like first-hand experiences of people, but without necessarily having to speak to them. Obviously, if you are able to collect primary data in an ethical way and like within the time, that's going to bring a really rich perspective, but it's not a requirement. And that also really varies by topic. So I don't know if you guys have got any like additional comments about how your data collection.
Yeah, like for example, we cited a TikTok, which is a sentence I never thought I would say in my academic career, but it's what I like about Map the System is it's less like sometimes academics can feel really like black and white, and it can feel really like not so much fun when you're just reading like all these academic papers all the time, which we did use some like academic sources for sure. It's a good idea to include at least a couple. But what I liked about Math System is it gave you a lot of freedom to be creative. And so, like I said, we looked at some TikToks, other like things on social media, I think Instagram, and then yeah, lots of magazine articles, more laid back sources like that. And we also did conduct some interviews. But obviously having Taylor and Leoma like in the physical community, we wouldn't have been able to do it without like that connection. But yeah, you can think outside of the box a little bit. Another thing that comes to mind, I know another team and topic that was at North Dakota State University, they sent out a survey. So that's something to consider too. You can really be creative with it.
Awesome. So one thing that we were really impressed with about your project last year was the kind of way you looked at your positionality, and you've kind of alluded to this already as you had a team of 2 Indigenous students and then 2 non-Indigenous students. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about kind of like any guidance you have maybe for Indigenous students that are interested in Map System, or even students that are interested in looking at challenges that affect Indigenous peoples, but they aren't a member of that community. And obviously we want to make sure that like lived experience is considered for, and this is done in like a very like respectful way, and we're not speaking on behalf of others. So if you guys have got anything to share about how that went for you and any advice, that would be wonderful.
I think for me, I think I mentioned this in like the Q&A section of our final presentation at Oxford, but I think just really being intentional, especially like I think if you're coming from a non-Indigenous perspective, and choosing a topic that does impact or consider Indigenous populations, is just being really intentional about what you're looking into and researching, and not doing it just because it's like a different topic or trying to win, but really what you're really passionate. I think the biggest thing here is like Leonla and I, like we've worked in some water access projects for work, and so I think it really hit close to home for us. But I think just having that perspective of, I think in some of my Indigenous health classes at UND, we talk about like doing things in a good way and like being good relatives. And so I think that's kind of carried me through my own like professional work, and then like my master's program, and then even MAPS is, doing something like, am I being a good relative about it? Am I talking about things? I really like this concept from, her name is Abigail Echohawk, and she talks about data as story, coming from an Indigenous perspective in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. She talks about, it's important to capture data for our communities meaning like tribal nations, but not just, right, like we need the quantitative data, but we also, like, data tells a story. It tells a story about the community. It tells a story about families and individuals. And so I think being conscious about like what data you're capturing, you're right, like that's the story. And so I think that is some aspect of what I tried to consider for MAPS, but also just like I said, for work and for my grad program as well.
I don't know if any of you, anyone else has anything to add there.
I also think that it was really hard because of the time, right? Like you have 10 minutes, and then I think at North Dakota we had like 5 minutes, but also I felt a huge responsibility you wanted to, like Taylor said, tell the whole story, but trying to figure out the pieces that are really important to educate, and to start at the very bottom so that it makes sense. And doing that in a respectful way and doing it first person, I feel like our team had the opportunity to do. Yeah, so I think that was something I thought about as well. And that it's our job to educate, to tell the story, but also to be really careful to not talk on behalf of everybody, which sometimes it seems like that's really easy to do, or people are thinking that we do. I mean, the US, has over 500 federally recognized tribes, and we only talk for ourselves. That's it. None of the other ones. Everybody has different culture, understanding and remembering that everyone has different cultures and customs and language and challenges and things like that. And so being well aware of like those things as well, and not to generalize, I think is also a good tip.
That just reminded me of something. So as part of our solutions landscape, so I live in Canada, and as part of our solutions landscape, we thought it would be cool to sort of dig into like what are the possible solutions for water access that are being tried here in Canada, because water access is a huge issue in Canada, especially in the far north where it's really rural and like there's not really much like cities or towns or anything like nearby. And so likely on the set, like we did include that in our presentation, but obviously we were mindful about not saying like, oh, this is what this tribe is doing, and so like the Navajo Nation should do the same thing. Like, no, that's just not how it works, especially because not only are they completely different tribes, it's like the far north frozen tundra versus like the Navajo Nation, which is largely desert. So right, there's like so much variation, which a lot of people don't actually realize, I feel like. And so while we did include that perspective, we were just careful to say like, this is what works for them, or what's being tried or what's being attempted. So maybe we can learn from it. But again, we don't want to like make generalizations because that can lead to dangerous like stereotypes, which are not good. We want to avoid that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and you did a really exemplary job of illustrating that and modeling that to all of us, which we really appreciate. So someone has also asked us, has taking part in MAP system influence kind of what you're thinking of doing, or what you're currently doing, or what you're thinking of doing in the future study, or your future work? And how do you hope you can continue to apply some of the things you learn on MAP system?
I was just typing my response to that question. But I think for me, I'm kind of in the last year, or I have about one more year before I finish my master's, and I've just taken an American Indian health policy course, and I'm now taking kind of a United States health policy course this semester. So for me, I think MAPS has really impacted or my way of looking at how a health challenge or healthcare access is really shaped by policy. And it's really hard to, I think there's a lot of work in public health that's prevention, but at the same time, what's shaped by the laws and the policies, and how do we be advocates? And so I think that's really kind of where I'm at. I'm not really sure. I wouldn't say I'm going to be working in policy, but I think I definitely am going to consider it a lot more, and thinking about the populations that I work with, and how they're impacted by certain policies. And so that's just kind of my perspective going forward from that.
I can share as well. So there's kind of two things. First, I've decided to bring Math System to my school. So I don't know if any of the McGill students are here today, but I've decided to take on like the educator role this year, which I'm super excited about. So that's kind of like a current short-term way that Math System has, I guess, changed my like life. But then also I really enjoyed like learning from Taylor and Leonla, and I just learned so much, and I was just like trying to listen as much as I possibly could and absorb as much information. And so I want to continue doing that in as many ways as I can. A couple ways that I'm doing that is this semester I'm taking 2 courses that center around like Indigenous ideas. They're 2 very different courses, but just kind of keeping that in my life because, like I said, I just really learned a lot, and I think it's super important. And yeah, moving forwards, I would definitely consider like a career that involve understanding like systems. I mean, they're everywhere. There's wicked problems everywhere in our society. And once you do map the system, you'll start to just like see them popping up. It's actually funny, like I don't know, we would send texts to each other and be like, I just was thinking about this thing and how that's like a broken system and needs to be fixed. Like it really gets into your brain in a good way. So that's kind of like very broad generally how it's kind of changed my life. But yeah, I wouldn't say I'm ready yet to like make any decisions about my future career or anything.
Kind of to piggyback off of that, yeah, I definitely remember all of us like texting and chatting even while we were in Oxford, like finishing up the project, and all of us just kind of being like, oh my gosh, what about this problem? We could do this, and what about this? And we could do that, and all of that. So that was definitely really fun to just kind of see how after working on a project for a few months, it really just kind of was embedded in our minds of that kind of way of thinking. And I think I don't want to speak for all of us, but it kind of just still is there, like still lingers, that kind of thinking. You see a problem and you don't necessarily want to find the immediate solution. You kind of want to take a step back and look at the background and take one more step at a time, and then try to find a solution from there. And I try to apply that in my courses, problems in life, taking a step back and trying not to assume things before I actually know the research of it, which, when you put it into perspective for this project, it was very grateful to have Leonla and Taylor, just making sure that we're doing everything respectfully, and that when we would go on our Zoom meetings, we would be able to like double check information of what we found on the internet and things like that. But yeah.
Amazing. Leonla, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think my team summed everything up great.
Amazing. So we've got another question here from Jackie. Thanks, Jackie. How did you go about narrowing down your topic enough so it was manageable, since like systems problems are so complex?
I think we knew we were going to do water access again, as we said in the beginning. Stephanie kind of was steering this boat at the beginning. And then we were like US, and then I don't remember if it was guidance from the educators or ourselves, again, because we didn't really know what we were doing. But we also, I think from some of the webinars, like the ones that we're having now, where like really being careful, there was a lot of guidance along narrowing things down and pinpointing. And so when we just were like, well, Navajo Nation, well, no, I think we said US, and then we're like Arizona, and then Navajo Nation. And then that's kind of how we just like really kept going further down until it was like that.
Amazing. Yeah, so we are going to host some more workshops coming up in February, which are about called like framing your problem. So once people have kind of started some of their research thinking about like the system's boundaries is kind of how we call it, because if you think about your systems map, that could just keep getting larger and larger and larger. So at some point you have to say like, no, we're kind of focusing on this part, this is our boundary. So we'll talk more about that. We've got more resources coming up on that. Sorry, Taylor, I think you were going to say something.
I was just going to say that I think kind of the whole group collaboration and then narrowing our topic really helped with like I couldn't be on the calls or like the webinars. So I think sometimes like Tegan or Abby, they would volunteer to watch it, and then they would report back to us. So that was really helpful. That's just another tip that I thought was really helpful for our group.
Awesome. So we've still got a few minutes left, but we're nearing the end of our time together. Thank you again for being here. A couple of the questions that I received offline that maybe we can just kind of finish on are any kind of advice you have on like how to be successful in the competition, and what you kind of felt like helped you guys stand out, because I know it was very competitive both within North Dakota State and then obviously when you guys came to Oxford, and also any top tips on how you go about like preparing for that presentation at the end. So I get that it will take us a while to cover all of those. So any like top tips that you each have would be amazing.
Practice. I think we wrote everything out, and for North Dakota, we got there early and we were able to practice in the room. And I know that you have that opportunity as well, I think, at Oxford. And just saying it out loud. And I'm not the person who likes to do that, to stand and say things out loud, but hearing the feedback and hearing yourself, getting comfortable. And then also, I think after we won at North Dakota, and then we went on to Oxford, Tegan reached out to like our judges, and they were able to provide feedback. And we were able to ask some specific questions, even down to like formatting what everything looks like, what our documents look like. And we really worked really hard on that. So taking in everybody's advice and suggestions, I think we really cast a wide net afterwards to make our final project for Oxford the best that it could be.
I think another thing that helped was we were pretty consistent throughout the months that we had to work on the project. Like, don't leave it all to the last minute, because even though we were pretty consistent, we still felt like a time crunch at the end. I think everyone would agree it was stressful. So just try your best to like cut it into bite-sized pieces throughout the weeks. Maybe like now would be a good time to really start thinking about your topic, narrowing it down like Alice mentioned, like we mentioned, and also thinking about like how are you going to go about researching your topic. That would be probably a good place to start. And then just like gradually throughout the months, think about like what's the next step, what's the next step, what's the next step. And if you have a team that you're working with, checking in with them consistently. It also is super helpful to divide up the work. Like we did a lot of like divvying up of things, which made the workload on everyone like so much easier than if we were just like doing it alone. So that's something to think about. If you're considering joining a team, I would recommend, but there's been projects done by individuals in the past that were super, super successful. So I'm not trying to like discourage you if you want to do it on your own, but I think working as a team was for us immensely, immensely helpful.
Also, something that I think was helpful too is that everybody knew, we stayed in contact all the time through text and everything. So everybody kind of really knew everything, all of the projects, so that we could all answer questions. But the thing that made me nauseous was like, I didn't know what questions were going to be asked. And so we were all really nervous. And Stephanie and Annalie talked to us about that. And well, if it's on this, who's going to answer like a topic? So we kind of like thought about that ahead of time as well. Or what are things, because again, your project is 5 minutes, right? Or 10 minutes or whatever. And there's just so much, by this point, there's so much information and everything is important. So what are things that you want to highlight? And so we also had that in the mind of like, okay, well, how can we bring this up? Or how we didn't get to mention this or talk about this, but we definitely want to highlight this. How do we bring it up? So having those thoughts prior to as well. So it's a lot of pressure, it sounds like, but I think it's just a lot of pre-planning as well and communication with your group.
Thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up in a second, but I just wanted to ask if any of you have got any final things that you've thought of that you want to share with the audience. No, sounds like we're all good. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tegan, Abby, Leonella, and Taylor. Really appreciate your time, and also Stephanie and Annalie for being there in the background. Thanks, Callum, for helping set up the webinar. It's been great to have you all here. Just before we go, if you've got a second, I'm going to just share a couple of tips for things like coming up and things to look out for people that are taking part this year. So please refer to the map system website. You can see like previous examples on there, some really helpful FAQs. Once you've registered for Canvas, we're going to start adding people from this week. So if you've already registered, you should expect to receive your login later this week. And also, please register for the upcoming workshops. We'll share a link in the chat in just a second. These are the key dates, which again, you can find on the website and also on the Canvas site. Just to recap the registration process, it's open till the end of January. You have to complete the online registration form. Someone from the team completes that with your proposed topic, all of your team members. But just a note that you can alter your topic and also your team members if you need to anytime before the deadline. If you have any new team members, you'll just need to let us know so we can make sure they have access to the resources. So Callum's just going to put a few links in the chat for helpful things for you guys to have a look at, and we'll also share this around on the email list for everyone who registered today. So please take a look at the finalist projects from last year for some ideas. You can look at the North Dakota State project, which we've heard so much about today. Also a link to the next few live sessions we have. Some further tips on topic inspiration that we're going to send a link to, and then finally just the registration link. So that's all I wanted to share at the end of today's session. We finished on time, which is great. Thank you so much everyone for listening in and for being here today, and thank you again to the North Dakota State team. Really appreciate your time. Great. And sorry, I'm just going to answer. Jackie's just asked a question. Do we mean teammates and topics can be modified? leading up to the April deadline. So the deadline for teams to register is end of January, but if there's a change to the team or the topic before April, that's fine, as long as you initially registered before then. Great. So thank you again, everyone. Thanks again for your interest in map system, and see you soon.